Hello there, welcome back and welcome to the third and final review of the RMS Titanic engine room sets from the Toray factory. Today is the last review and I'm reviewing the 1:200 scale model. And I'm actually going to review two things here. I'm going to review the 1:200 set itself, that's FS21, and I'm also going to review the 1:200 set of boiler room staff. So these are 3D printed figures in 1:200 scale that sort of go along with and complement this set. So we'll do the actual engine room set first and then we'll show these later on. So I've never opened this before, so let's have a look. So first off, nice big box. Not a huge amount to be said about the box other than it is a box. And inside we've got some instructions, and then we've got a bag which contains, a bag that contains the sort of decking piece. So this would be your sort of tank top, and this comes in two sections. You've got the forward section with your boiler rooms, and then the aft sections with your engines and also your propeller shaft halls and that sort of thing as well. So pop those back in there to keep them safe. And then the kit is split into 4 different boxes. Box 1, 2, 3 and 4. So I'll clear a bit of space on the table and we'll get into it. So first off, let's have a shifty at the instructions. And I like the fact that they include Titanic sister ships in here as well, because you really could make this set out to be Olympic or Britannic as well. So as always, part lists, and it's nice that it's divided into the actual boxes. So this is what to expect in box 1. You've got your boilers and you've got various other things. That's also boiler stuff. I think this is all boiler stuff. So box 1 is your boilers. Box 2 is your coal bunkers and the like, and also you've got some bulkheads, and if I'm not mistaken, the crankshaft for your engines. And then box 3 and 4, you've got your actual engines themselves, and then box 4, you've basically got the remainder of the equipment, the ancillary equipment, a lot of valves, you've got your thruster blocks, your turbine props, you've got your bearings here, all that sort of stuff. So that's good. I like a parts list because you can go through and check everything's there before starting the kit off, and of course that sort of means if you are missing any parts, you identify it early and you can raise it up with the manufacturer, so that's always a good thing. And then we go into the actual steps. So as you can see, we start off with the acrylic plate, getting that sorted out. We then put down our boilers, fix up the boilers with all of the photo etch, which I'll show you in just a moment. And I like that actually you have various options for the photo etch. You can have damper plates, open, close, that sort of thing, which is always a good thing. It means you can sort of customize it a bit more. It means everything isn't sort of copied and pasted, so to speak. You know, you've got 29 boilers here. They're probably not all going to be in the same configuration. So that's good. And then because this is a larger scale kit, on the other kits I worked on, the boilers were all sort of one piece. Because this is a bit higher scale, larger scale, your pipe work and your valves and stuff are actually separate individual pieces. Now that in some way simplifies things. It certainly simplifies things from a painting perspective, because it means that you can paint different colours before gluing, so you get those really nice crisp lines between parts. But it also complicates things slightly in terms of gluing things down in place. But I think on the whole, that's probably a good thing, really. And again, because we're in higher detail, we've got a lot more photo etch with a lot more detail on it. We've got things like railings here for the first time. So we've got a lot more photo etch, which is always very, very good. And then we move on to fitting things like our coal bunkers with our coal effect on the top. And then we move on to the engines. I won't dwell too much on these instructions because, you know, they are just instructions, but they're in colour, which is helpful. It's just a lot easier to pick things out when they're in colour. You know, you see the stasis of the model, and then the things you're adding are in a different colour, which is always useful. And they're nice and big. The instructions are pretty easy to follow. So I would say on the whole these are pretty good. I certainly hadn't found any problems interpreting instructions in any of the Tory Factory kits before now. And so there you go. So that's your instructions. Now let's have a look at the acrylic bases. Now I think these are really good. So they're quite thin. They're probably about 2 mil, 3 mil, something like that. Laser cut. And they've got the engravings for the actual placement of the parts. So for example, this is where your engines would go. This is where your thrust blocks go, so on and so on. And I think that is extremely useful because spacing things out, particularly when you've got engines leading into thrust blocks, leading into bearings, all the way back, you've got a lot of things that all have to be very precisely located. Whenever you've seen, if you've watched some of my earlier videos on this kit, the location actually can be a bit of a challenge. So having an engraved, sort of stenciled out base is extremely useful. It's a little bit wibbly wobbly, but to be honest, I don't think that's a problem because, you know, you're going to be putting this on a base anyway, so it doesn't really matter. And then for the boiler rooms at the front, it's nice that you've got things numbered. Again, it just kind of idiot-proofs it. It looks quite simple to start with, but the amount of times I've glued something down and then gone, oh damn, that's the wrong part. Having these numbers on, I do think it's quite helpful. I think it's quite useful, and just physically holding these in my hands, you get a good idea of the sheer scale of this model. 1 to 200 is just, it's obviously double the size, but it feels significantly bigger than 1 to 400, and because of that, the scope for detail is just so much greater. So that's really exciting to see. So let's have a look at some of these parts. So the first things first, we've got our coal bunkers here with our sort of coal effect. And again, this is actually a piece of sandpaper. And I think it's a good idea. It looks the absolute business. It looks exactly like coal, feels like coal. And I mean, frankly, I think you would struggle to make a better coal lookalike than that. So I think that's a really nice touch. And the fact that it's already cut out for you is a massive simplification. So very, very good, top marks to Tory Factory there. And we've also got some photo etch, and probably worth noting that you've got quite a lot more photo etch than you would have done in the previous sets. One criticism of the packaging here is that I'd have liked to have seen some separation between the layers of photo etch, because what can often happen is bits can sort of hook underneath the brass, and then you can end up sort of, when you take things apart, you can end up bending things, which isn't the end of the world. You can bend them back, but it's just a bit annoying, and it's not ideal. But there you go. Photo etch. The actual production of the photo etch is very good quality. It's really nice brass. It's nice and thin, so you've got that kind of realistic detail. The vast majority of this is all railings and stuff. You know, that's a walkway with railings that bend up, and you've got ladders and things like that. On this piece here, you've got your engine catwalks and things like that. They're all numbered individually, so you shouldn't have any problem working out what part goes where. So on the whole, I have no critique for these, really. I think they're very good. They've got to me in good condition, so they are pretty well packed. As I say, maybe just a bit of separation between each layer would sort of help guarantee that things get to their destination okay, but photo etch is a pretty robust thing after all. I mean, we're talking about metal, and as long as you keep it flat, there's probably not much scope for problems. Right, so here we are with box number 1. So in here we should have all our boiler room stuff, and there you go. So first note on the packaging, I would have perhaps liked to have seen a bit more sort of robust packaging. These are all just kind of shoved in there, and that's not a huge issue, but it is a bit sort of problematic. You know, I could see things getting scraped or slightly damaged, so that's perhaps something for Tory Factory to sort of work on. Now, let's have a look. So what I'll do is I'll take some still images of these because it's probably easier. But the detail, as you might expect from Tory Factory and as you might expect from modern 3D printing, is excellent. And the detail is much higher quality than on either of the two smaller versions of this model. And that stands to reason. You've got a lot more space to work with, so you can fit in detail more accurately. There's a bit of scuffing there. But you know, you've got things like rivet detail, seams taken. There's quite a lot more detail on the face of the boilers. You've got things like you've got wheels, gauges. What's that? Yes, you've got little sort of bandings and stuff like that as well. So the detail here is really pretty good. Now then, these boilers are actually not hollow. One thing I thought would be a nice idea would be to have holes in the actual fire doors, so that if you wanted, you could put an LED inside the boiler to sort of allow the look of a sort of furnace blazing inside. And what I have been told is that the more recent printings of this model will have that. This is presumably an older printing which doesn't have that, so don't be put off by that. That is something that Tory Factory have said they're going to add. It's just not something that's on the recreation I've got. So that's just something to note. So we'll just move over to some photos now, and I'll give you some close-ups. So here we have some close-ups of the boilers, and as you can see, the rivet detail is exceptionally good, as is the recreation of things like the fireboxes as well. And you can see here you've got sort of valve work, and you've also got some sort of like inspection ports, things like that. The doors of the firebox are actually like a legitimately printed piece. You can just see here there's a really nice seam detail, but there is a little bit of scuffing going on, which is a little bit of an issue. And the last item in this box is the propeller shafts, and as you can see, you can even sort of pick out the hexagonal shape of the bolts that join the sections of propeller shaft together. Really, really good. So here's what I mean with the hollowness in the boiler. This is a single-ended boiler, and as you can see, it is actually a hollow part. You can go right through, and of course that makes perfect sense. It would be a waste of 3D printing resin otherwise. But what I'd have liked to have seen is for the fire doors to actually have a hole all the way through. And they actually don't. They've got quite a thin wall of resin there. Now that's not the end of the world. If you wanted to light these boilers, you could drill through and add your own LED, but it would, you know, it would just simplify the job for the modeler if that was already done for you. As I say, apparently that is being done on later versions of this model, so don't be put off by that. But very, very nice recreation. And I mean, you can even see the doors of the fire pit are actually like fine printing. So really, really beautiful work. And lastly, on the boilers, we've also got some very nice valve gear, which of course takes your steam from the boiler out into the rest of the circuit. Okay, here we are with box number 2. And as you will remember, this is the box which has our coal bunkers in. And again, a reminder of how much bigger this model is than the previous one. This is the size of our coal bunkers. And in comparison to the last model, my word, they are large. So yeah, you're certainly getting your money's worth with this one. And the sort of increased detail that's quite obvious, things like the coal bunker doors are open, and they actually are apertures. So if you wanted, you could, for example, have some coal sort of falling out of these to sort of add to the detail. You know, watertight door again there is open. So again, you could have a person halfway through the door or something like that. So a little bit more scope to sort of bring the model to life, perhaps at this scale. More so anyway than you'd have had at the lower scales. In terms of detail, it's very good, as you might expect. You've got all your sort of like rivet detail, and you've also got sort of light detail on the side. And there is also some photo etch which gets added to these later, which improves detail further. So these are very nice, and I won't show you them all because probably it would be fair to say once you've seen one coal bunker, you've seen them all. This is the first one, which would lead you off to the fireman's passage. And again, really nice detail, lots of sort of pipe work, stuff like that, rivet seams, open coal bunker doors. It's very highly recreated, this. It's very well done. The other stuff you get in this box, you get the crankshafts, which I won't show you yet. I'll show you them in the engine section of the video. But you do get these. So this is some of the steam pipework equipment that I believe attaches to the boilers. But these in other kits were recreated in photo etch. This is actually recreated in resin. So again, evidence that we're in a much higher scale here, which is nice. And then we've got some bulkheads. So this is a bulkhead, as you can see, once you're past the engines and turbines, because you've got 3 shafts. And the detail is pretty good. It'll need a fair bit of sanding on the bottom because it's got its casting marks, but that's not an issue. It just takes a bit of prep. And the surface is a little bit scuffed, so I'd recommend going over there with some isopropyl alcohol and sort of getting rid of that sort of resin residue. This is just sort of dried on resin that's just sort of been not quite washed off sufficiently. It's not an issue, it just requires a bit of cleaning and prep before you start to paint. And similarly, just with all photo etch, there is a little bit of warping in some of these parts. Again, that's not a sort of manufacturing defect or anything, it's just part of the process. It just requires a bit of heat. You could use something like a hairdryer or something, or even a glass of warm water, and these should bend quite nicely back into position. Equally, it takes very little force to bend these back, so you probably could just get away with gluing them and straightening them out when you glue, and you won't have any problems. But very nice piece of bulkhead there. And this is my favourite one because there's so much going on it. You've got all these valves and sort of instrumentation, steam lines everywhere. So it's a very nicely recreated thing. And then on the back, this is the boiler room side, you've got practically no detail at all, which is great. It's just like, it's sort of utilitarian. So you've got your rivet seams, but one side is busy and the other side is really quite sort of composed. Quite an interesting thing. So this is the bulkhead that separates off your boiler rooms from your engine room, which is why you've got all this instrumentation and stuff here. Again, really, really nicely built up. Just needs a little bit of cleaning here. But I think, you know, once you've painted this white, if you could get some black wash in there and sort of pick out the details, pick out the steam lines, the detail here would really pop, and I think that's really, really good. Okay, box number 3 now. And in here you've got your engines, probably the bit that people are most excited about in this kit, I would imagine. And again, because we're in a larger scale now, you really do get a lot more detail for your money. These engines are recreated with a lot more detail than they were in previous scales, and that's just because of simplicity of doing it at this scale versus smaller scales. But you do end up with engines that are going to look extremely nice. These engines do have the same problems that I spoke about on the other engines. The cylinders are not quite aligned correctly. The correct order, if this is the bow and this is the stern, would be to have your cylinders like this: low pressure, high pressure, intermediate, low pressure. And on this model, they're actually arranged like this. So you've got low pressure, intermediate, high pressure, low pressure. So the ordering is actually wrong. Again, this is something Tory Factory are already dealing with, so don't be alarmed about this. It's wrong on this model, it won't be wrong on future models. And as I say, and I've said this in previous videos, I think it's a shame that the mistake was made in the first place, but I think it's really good that Tory Factory have listened to the problem and committed to correcting it. I think that's kind of what you want to see from a manufacturer. So that's very good. So as you might expect, we have 2 engines. We've got the port and the starboard. And you've got your engine cylinders on top. Again, because this is larger scale, the engines come as separate pieces. So for example, your crankshafts, which are beautifully recreated. I'll take some close-ups of these. These are absolutely gorgeous. But the crankshafts are a separate piece to the main engines. Cylinders are separate again. And all of the other sort of ancillary pieces, things like your Stephenson's reversing linkages and stuff like that, they are also separate as well. Why is that good? It's because you can paint them so much more easily. You can paint your crankshaft in a metallic colour. Same with your reversing linkages. You can paint your engine supports in your sort of creamy kind of yellow colour, and then you can pick out the cylinders in black. It just makes lining things up and accurate paint jobs far, far easier. So that's a huge tick in the box. In this box, we've also got some baffles for boilers and stuff like that. I'll take some close-ups of these. And then lastly, we've got the sort of ancillary equipment in the engine room. So you've got pumps, You've got some winches, and of course you've got your main exhaust outlets from the engines which lead onwards to the turbines. So some close-ups of all of these with a little bit more discussion. So the first thing here is the crankshaft, and as you can see it's been really well done. You've got each of the cranks for the cylinders, and you've also got the connections for the eccentrics for the Stephenson's reversing linkages, which are just beautiful, and you can see the bolt holding these things together. The recreation at this scale really is just spectacular. This stuff is things like water pumps and also steam pipe work, the sort of things that would carry water up into the top of the ship, providing enough pressure to push water around circuits. We've also got other ancillary equipment that you'd expect in an engine room, things like winches and things like that. And this is the first of the engines, and you can also see the reversing cylinder on the side as well. These have been beautifully created, but do just bear in mind they look a bit barren at the moment, and that's because a lot of photo etch gets added to these to really pick out more of the detail. So by the time these are painted and fully populated with all the parts, they will be significantly busier than they appear here. And of course, these are the cylinders. You can see the beautiful rivet detail and the bolt work on the top. You can really sort of get a sense for the amount of pressure that these things are holding back. And as I say, cylinders will be corrected for their positioning later on. In this little small box, we have the actual reversing linkages themselves, and we've also got the cappers for the crankshafts. Again, really lovely creations there. We've got a bit more steam pipe work, and we've also got the main gear wheel that comes off and drives into the thrust blocks as well. And the last little piece is the propellers, and I will talk a wee bit more about the propellers later, but these are very similar to the propellers that you might get in the KA set for your Trumpeter Titanic. Extremely nicely detailed, and you get things like the bolting detail on the side. Really, really nice. Okay, here we are now, final box. Box numero 4. So in here we've got another bulkhead with some more really nice detail on it. Similarly on the other side, again a little bit of residue that needs to be cleared off, but nothing that a bit of isopropyl alcohol wouldn't fix. We've got the low pressure turbine, and again same thing, a little bit of resin residue that really needs to be sorted out. Again, these are hollow, so this is a bit lighter than you might expect. But I mean, this is really beautifully made. There's rivet detail everywhere. You can really get the sort of casting image from the sort of ribbing that's on this part. It's extremely nicely made, this. It is a little bit warped, but again, this is quite a large part, so you kind of would expect that. A little bit of heat would sort that out, no problem. Other items that we have. These are some propeller shafts in the various different sizes. So the slightly thinner propeller shaft is the central propeller. These are the external prop shafts, a bit thicker. They're very nicely done, and I'll show you a close-up of some different parts of these, but these are sufficiently well detailed that even at the joints between the propeller shaft, you can actually pick out the hexagon shape of the bolts that held them in place. So really, really high detail. And I mean, you know, this is still 1 to 200. It's a large scale, but it's not huge, and you're getting incredibly high detail for that. These are the ending shafts. So these are the shafts which go through the actual hull of the ship and terminate with propellers themselves. So you've got 3 again, thinner shaft for the central propeller, thicker for the external wing propellers. And then we've got some winches. These are quite commonplace on Titanic. They were the same design as the winches that were on the boat deck, with these nice drums on the side. These are really nicely designed parts. The detail here is just staggering when you think about that's in my hand. The detail here is just staggering, it really is. And you've also got the central sort of console for the room. So this is the console that stood in the middle of the engine room, and I'll take some close-ups of this. But this is the actual epicenter. This is the nerve center of the engine room. This is where commands would come from the bridge and be delivered to the engineers, who would then translate those commands into engine movement. So you've got things like telephones, you've got a lot of dials, You've got your actual telegraphs there, which would communicate up to the bridge. Beautiful, really interesting. We've also got our propellers. So the central propeller is modelled as a 3-bladed central propeller. If you want a 4-bladed central propeller, it's not included in the kit. The kit assumes that Titanic's central propeller was 3-bladed. So if, for example, you were creating Olympic or something like that, you might need to get a 4-bladed propeller elsewhere, but it's not included in the kit. Just bear that in mind. The 2 wing propellers have the blades separate and they have to be glued on. But I think that actually, that kind of simplifies things, because if you're going to paint these accurately, the blades will be in bronze and the tips of the sort of the base of the wings and the actual sort of heart of the propeller themselves would be in red in anti-fouling, so that actually simplifies things slightly. And we've also got, now these are parts from the boiler rooms once again. These are the safety valves for the tops of the boilers, and these are some of the interconnections for the boilers. So this is boiler room equipment once again. And then we have our electricity generators. These are beautiful. I'll get some close-ups of these, but honestly, the detail on these, you're actually getting down to seeing the windings, which is just incredible. And you've got various pumps and ancillary equipments, condensers, your thrust blocks over here for your 2 main engines, and you've got your pipework that leads into the low pressure turbine as well. And then finally, the last parts of the kit are these, and this is not me, this is damage that has been done presumably during transit. And I mean, none of these parts have actually been damaged, but it does just kind of show that packaging could be slightly improved, because these are, damage could have occurred to these without too much else going wrong. But I'll just show you these up close. These are the bearing blocks which carry the propeller shafts away from the engines and out towards the stern of the ship. And again, the detail here is just so good. You've got the sort of ribbing from the casting work. You've even got, as I say, the sort of hexagonal shapes of the bolts holding these together. It's astoundingly good. It really is astoundingly good. And so here we have a nice close-up photo of the low pressure turbine. As I say, exceptionally well detailed, and this is a sizable part, so plenty of scope for nice painting on here to make details pop. The end shafts to mount the 3 propellers, and you've got a lot of nice sort of bearing detail as these would penetrate through the hull. These have been really nicely created. Again, things like hexagon bolt details, very, very, very visible. And your electricity generators, and I think these are probably my favourite parts on the whole model. The way that they have managed to recreate the windings on the rotational sections of the generators is just beautiful. This is one of the bearing blocks which the propeller shafts would go through, and I really like how you can sort of see the half sections bolted together. They again have been extremely nicely created. And then we've also got the central console for the engine room. This is where the likes of Joseph Bell would have stood to control the engines. And you've got this lovely desk with your various different pressure gauges and dials on. Again, nice scope for some really nice quality painting there if you're that way inclined. And then we've got these regular winches. These were scattered throughout Titanic. Extremely well done. And the thrust blocks as well. And again, these are really nicely done. The sectional sort of ribbing on these just seems to come out a lot more crisply than it did in the smaller scales. And finally, we've got the condensers and the other ancillary pipe work that comes from the reciprocating engines down into the turbines. And again, we've got some lovely sort of seam plate details here, rivets and all the like. One other nice thing to mention about this set is that you get a complementary figure included, and this is significantly higher scale, larger scale than the rest of the model, so this won't sort of fit in with the model, so to speak. But it's just an additional figure that you get, and it makes quite a nice sort of display piece. This is a stoker, so he's got the shovel ready to go, shoveling coal into your boilers. But it's quite a nice addition. It's something that you don't get in any of the other smaller versions of this kit. It's only something that you get in the 1:200 scale. So I'll take a photo of this just so you can see a bit more clearly. But it's a very nicely little made model. and it would be a very good sort of painting challenge, I suppose. So here's a close-up of the additional figure that you get, and as I say, much larger scale than the rest of the model, so not something to be included in the model, but it is exclusive to this kit, so you'll never find it anywhere else. And it's a nice piece. I think you could have a lot of fun painting and decorating this. And I mean, again, like with all of this stuff, it's testament to how far 3D printing's come. The other thing that I said I'd review is the set of figures that you get in 1 to 200 scale for this model. And what you actually get in this set is 120 different figures, so that's a lot of people. That's plenty, really, for this model. And they come in 10 different shapes, so you've got various figures using spades, you've got one figure pushing a wheelbarrow, you've got some people sort of standing upright, but you get 10 different shapes and you get 12 of each person. So I guess the thing to be careful of here is to not have people in identical poses standing right next to each other. But as with all of the figures, this is from the same range as the type of figures I used on my Trumpeter Titanic model. And as with all these figures, the detail that they are created with is absolutely fantastic. It's really good. And I think this is where the 1 to 200 engine set stands apart from the others. Because you're that little bit higher scale, you have that ability to have humanoid figures in there, which means that you can bring this model to life with these things in. You can have stokers shoveling coal into the boilers while the boilers flicker with light coming out. You can have trimmers running around with their wheelbarrows, supplying coal to the stokers. You can have engine room staff lubricating the engines. Maybe you can have Joseph Bell standing by that control centre. So I think where the smaller models are very nice models on a sort of like informational level, with the 1 to 200 scale model, you really have the chance to actually build it to life, and it almost becomes a bit more of a sort of diorama, really. So let's have a little bit of a conclusion now. So this model can be bought from the Tory Factory's website, and I will put a link in the description of this video to where you can find that. It retails for $280, so it's a high-end model. It's an expensive piece, but when you look through these parts, you can see not only the quality of the 3D printing, but also the amount of time and effort that will have had to have gone into modelling these components. I don't think it's an unreasonable cost, to be honest. It's a bit of a niche model. It's not for everyone. And as I've said with the other engine room models, you're not going to end up with a beautiful, elegant ship in the same way that you would if you were building a model of Titanic in totality. But what you do end up with is an extremely unique and interesting model that demonstrates exactly how ships of this era actually operated. And you will certainly get questions from people when they see it on your shelf. Now, at 1 to 200 scale, I think this is the absolute best scale in terms of detail, and that's pretty obvious. The recreation of detail at this scale is so much more crisp and impressive than at the smaller scales. The 1 to 400 and the 1 to 700, they're good models in their own right, but they really cannot compete with the detail that you get in this model. And bear in mind that in 1 to 200 scale, other things which add more detail become realistic options. There's a lot more photo etch in this kit, and as we know, that massively increases the detail that you can get out of a model. Again, at 1 to 200, as I've just said, the opportunity to be able to add people into the model as well. They give the model a lot of stuff. When I added people to my model Titanic, the thing that struck me more than anything else was that it changed it from a pleasant model of a ship into something that gave you a little bit more context to things. First of all, it gives you context to the scale. Having a human as a sort of like measuring stick against the equipment in the engine room, for example, really gives you an idea for the sheer scale and the sheer power that these things were outputting. If you put a human next to the propeller shaft and see that the propeller shaft is twice as thick as a human being, it really gives you an idea for just how incredibly large scale these things were. And of course, the other thing it gives you is a far more sort of lifelike feeling, because all of a sudden the model stops being a sort of sanitized thing, I suppose, and you end up with something which is just far more like realistic and lifelike. And I think that's the advantage of this scale. You actually, at 1 to 400, 1 to 700, things are just too small to be able to do that. At 1 to 200, you can actually get realistic looking human beings wandering around and stuff, and that is a huge accolade. And it gives you a lot of options with things. I think if I were building this, I would be doing things like dropping lumps of coal on the floor, maybe having one of the stokers picking up coal with the shovel from a mess on the floor. I'd maybe have a wheelbarrow that's tipped over and had coal pouring out of it. I'd be putting some oil stains on the floor, things like that. The sort of everyday imperfections that you get, which wouldn't really be possible in a smaller scale. So I think that's what this model gives you that the smaller scales don't. Now, of course, there are trade-offs. It is a large model, footprint-wise, it is exactly the same footprint as the Trumpeter Titanic kit, which is very large. It's about 1.3 meters long. And, that's a sizable thing, and not everyone has space in their house for that. And, of course, it's quite expensive. It's $280. That's a lot of money. So I think there are pros and cons to this, and it really boils down to what your preferences are as a modeler. I think if you really just want a sort of a depiction of what the engineering spaces on the Olympic class liners were, the 1 to 400 model actually does you just fine. If you want to have something which is more of a sort of depiction of what the engineering spaces were like to live in, to operate in, then the 1 to 200 scale is a far better bet. So, just a couple of closing points. The first thing to say is, as with all of these models, they are not designed to fit into existing models of Titanic. This is not designed to fit into the Trumpeter Titanic model. This is designed as a standalone model, and I just need to make that clear because it's been raised before, and I need to make sure that that is clear to people. A couple of improvements, I think. On the whole, the one thing I really would suggest improvement on is packaging. There was a few times when I sort of said, there's a few little scuff marks here, or I talked about things like the photo etch potentially snagging on itself, and just things like that. When you're buying a model that's $280, it really matters that it gets to you in one piece. So a little bit of improved packaging would not go amiss at all. And of course, the other thing that I would like to see done is the correction of the arrangement of the cylinders on the reciprocating engines. And as I say, that's already in the works. So, closing remarks. This is a fantastic model, and you would have a lot of fun building it. If you're interested in Victorian engineering, steam engines, anything like that, this is a really interesting model. And it's just interesting to see how incredibly complicated the systems that made up these ships actually were. So I think if you have any interest in that sort of thing, I really would recommend it. And I really mean that. I'm not saying this because I've been sent it. I really would recommend it. It's a bit of an educational kind of journey, just looking at these models and seeing how they actually fit together. You also get that really nice impression of how the Olympic class liners' watertight arrangements was actually made. You can see the bulkheads. You can see how the ship was compartmentalized in that way. If you wanted, you could even do a diorama of the compartments that were actually breached when Titanic hit the iceberg or something like that. There's a lot of scope in this kit, I think, to do different things. So it's really, it's the kind of kit that I think you can sort of, you just make it however you want. You can make it absolutely pristine, perfect, like no one's ever been in, like the engines have never run. You could make it dirty and greasy and oily, like Olympic after 5 or 6 years. If you wanted a bit of a challenge, you could even tweak it and change it and make it like Olympic after she got converted over to oil. Or you could make it like Titanic and you could have a wall with water bursting through the seams. The scope on this is really quite high for you to do whatever you want. So Really, really interesting model and very versatile. So really, it only remains for me to say sincerely thank you very much to the Tory Factory for sending this to me. I've really enjoyed reviewing all 3 of the kits that they sent across, and I thoroughly enjoyed building the 1:400 scale model. So, with that said, I will leave it there. If you do have any questions, comments, what have you, pop them down below and I'll do my absolute best to get back to you. If you have enjoyed this video, do please like and or subscribe, and I will see you in the future for more modelling videos. Bye for now.